Good afternoon. Well, developing the documentation as part of the Quality Board for such an important process as institutional review is one thing. Seeing it work in practice, which we did last year with the University of Reykjavik and with Frank chairing, is quite another. But actually taking part in the review system is something else. And that's something I hope to open up a little bit for you this afternoon. Reading your reflective analyses gives a very good idea, of course, of how the institution works, but going into the institution, and especially in this case, seeing these two institutions, the Agricultural University and Holar, in the beautiful settings and in incredibly lucky March weather, which we had, then getting to know the people and hearing from them what's important to them and what they're doing was in fact a great privilege. And I'm very grateful to the Ministry, to Ranus and to the Quality Board for giving me the experience, and I'm sure that would be echoed by the entire review team. It was a great privilege. Today has got two purposes for me. One is to feed back the experience to share with the rest of you, but perhaps as important to give some indicators to those universities who are still to go through the process. What I intend to do is to start from where we are in the review cycle, then the lead up to the two reviews, and the main issues which arose in the preparation for the reviews, both developing the reflective analysis and the practical issues nearer the time. And after that, the reviews themselves and the significant issues which were explored during those visits. And lastly, the outcomes and the positive findings of these experiences. And my slides will be, I've given them to Einar, and they'll be available to be circulated by anybody that wants them. Right, so let's just start with a reminder of where we are in the review cycle. I mean, Norman's already mentioned this. Last year, University of Reykjavik, this year, Agricultural University and Holar. Next year in March, Akureyri, and in October, probably, the Academy of the Arts. Thereafter, University of Iceland and Bifrost. Now, the Quality Board made the decision to do both the Agricultural University and Holar together in the same week. And it made sense at the time, without doubt. They're both small institutions with something of an overlap in their curricula. We could share the panel members, we could share the training, the geography, and the expense. Mainly the expense. To be sure, there were some benefits. We adjusted as a team to the parameters, the focus, the scale, and we had a good team effort which developed over the two reviews. But there were disadvantages. Small is not less of a process than large. There were time restrictions. There was a danger to our concentration because it was very strenuous from our point of view as well as for the institutions. There was the danger of comparisons being made, which we didn't want to do. And of course, any hitches, like the weather, which might have cropped up, would have put the whole schedule in jeopardy, or indeed any issues that needed clarification that only came out in the course of the reviews themselves. So I'll say more about this later, but I don't think that's something that the Quality Board would want to see repeated. And I hope that any feeling of pressure during the event itself was more than made up for in the support that the institutions may have received before, and I hope afterwards if that's necessary. And today I'm going to be drawing on issues from both reviews, but I stress again that we didn't think of these institutions that way. There were two individual institutions that were focused on in two quite separate ways, and they're two very individual events. Now obviously the Agricultural University in Holar, like Reykjavik and like every other institution in Iceland, had never done a reflective analysis before. And in these cases, with small institution, there was no dedicated member of staff to do it. So it was a big strain on the staff to put this together. And in order to help focus in preparation and help with the reflective analysis, we instigated a number of meetings, which I hope were helpful. We had first conversations with both institutions a year ago. Holar by video link, no, it was by telephone, wasn't it? By telephone, and with Aslag in Ranus. Then in November I came here and talked to the institution here and to Holar by video link, and at that point the very first drafts of the reflective analysis were written. During November and December, I had 3 more drafts sent by email and responded and passed some of that on to Frank, so we collaborated to a certain extent at that point. And then in January, we visited, and again, the weather was fantastically kind to us, we visited Holar just to get, an impression of what the place looked like, what it was about, because that can't be got from a reflective analysis. So in January we made that trip, and the reflective analyses were submitted by the 17th of January. The review week, very concentrated review week, starting on the 9th of March. Sunday we travelled, Monday we trained, Saturday we travelled, Sunday we trained, Monday and Tuesday and a bit of Wednesday in the Agricultural University. The rest of Wednesday, after dashing up, in Holar, Thursday and Friday in Holar, Saturday back at Rannis, where we spent the entire day in discussion of the issues and the draft letters that were ready to go out to all intents and purposes by the end of that Saturday. And then on Sunday we went home and rested. But that's the Sabbath, isn't it? A good thing to do. A word about the headline letters, which were sent to the rectors on the 22nd of March. These contained the main issues that were positive and the main issues that were main issues for development, and also the judgment that was in these. Thereafter, the team wrote and edited the reports, a very elaborate process of cross-correspondence by email. I don't know what would have happened before the days of email, which took weeks. By the 15th of May, the first drafts were ready to send to the institutions, and by the end of May, those drafts were taken to the last meeting of the Quality Board for approval in principle. The reports then went back to the rectors for correction, and by the end of August the draft reports were finalised, again gone to the rectors, and yesterday we had discussion with the rectors to tidy up any issues at the last minute. And thereafter, what time did you put your finger on the button?
16:05.
16:05, the button was pressed, and that was publication. So it was a long, I think very thorough and extremely consultative process. I want to survey for you the kind of issues that Frank and I discussed with the institutions in the course of drafting the reflective analysis, because I think the rest of the institutions will meet with the same issues. Regardless of what your subject specialisms are, the issues will not be very different. And I think I've put this in the form of advice to the universities about to undergo review or have upcoming reviews. I'll start with the main issues in preparation for the reflective analysis. And just to remind you, of course you know this, but the preparation of the reflective analysis is not only the preparation of a document, but it's preparation for the review, and beyond the review is preparation for the strategic plan and the future of the institution. So the preparation part is really where all the thinking has to be done. And it should, above all, be useful and usable for the institution. So, advice. Start early. It may be a bigger task than you think. It probably is. Involve key staff from the start and brief relevant students from the start. Unpack the process to the institution in comprehensible form. For the rectors, delegate responsibilities so that people feel included, they feel part of the process. Involve support staff. Keep the University Council, University Board in the loop. Build on any previous reviews, any external accreditations, for example. Build on what happened in those and the findings of those. Build on any internal and subject reviews. They have to feed in. Arrange a schedule of communication, tasks, meetings from whenever you start until the time of submission, and keep to it. Regardless, keep to it. Decide on the format of your reflective analysis. It is yours. Do you want to follow the model that's put out in the handbook? Is it appropriate? Does it have a relationship to the format of your current or your future institutional strategy? Do you want a separate section on research, for example, or not? Take the opportunity to take stock and make changes. It's a positive process for the future. Take the opportunity also to listen and to analyse. Think of the institution's performance from the student's point of view. Take the time to reflect on the vision of your institution as you see it for the future. Also think of the scale of quality enhancement which fits your institution and which will build on what's already working. It's not a new system you want, it's one that enhances what you've got. Assemble all relevant documentation, things like policies, rules, external agreements, research areas, and particularly statistical information. It's so helpful to yourselves as well as to any visiting team to have the information in some kind of readable, accessible form. This is something that we've been trying to sort out with the Ministry ever since I joined this quality board, some kind of data set. And in fact we're in the process now of assembling maybe a single page of stuff that you can put factual and statistical information onto and that's easy to read. Things like admissions, on-course numbers, programme numbers, pass-fail statistics, first destinations for students, things of that sort in a kind of easily accessible form. Clarify the roles and responsibilities, structures and processes. You'll find that the word processes comes up a lot. You know, something that happens systematically, that goes out and feeds back. Something that's got loops to it. Not something that happens in the best sense. It may happen ad hoc, but something that happens systematically and that is transparent. Think about the remits of committees and who's on them. Who currently does what for quality assurance and quality enhancement? How are key decisions taken? How did you respond to previous reviews and what did you learn from them? Now these issues are sometimes quite difficult to judge from the inside. So why don't you ask a critical friend to have a look at these? Talk to someone that has a knowledge of your institution but is a little outside it. You may be surprised with what they tell you. Think of issues of course validation and review, programme validation. How and why are new programmes introduced? Is the process of validation clear? Does it involve externals? Do people know how it happens? Analyse how you ensure your programmes are working. Ask key staff about this. Ask students about this. How do you know that students are happy with their lot in that context? Ensure that course and programme documentation is clear and accessible. People can lay their hands on it. They know where it is. It's not in some big tome somewhere in a cupboard. The issue of research is relevant here too. You know, how do you incorporate your staff research into teaching programmes? Can you give us some examples of that? Ensure that assessment processes are clearly stated and understood by students. They're transparent, if possible transparent and understood by students. Think of questions of standards. Who do you benchmark yourself against? Reflect also on the relationships with external institutions, industry, external professionals. Think about your facilities. They needn't be grand, needn't be magnificent, but do they suit the purpose for which your institution exists? Make sure the information is easily accessible and disseminable to staff and students. Make it accessible. At all points, consult and involve the student body. Accept or decline their suggestions. You don't have to listen to them all the time, but they've got to know that you've heard them and that maybe you do something to show that you've heard them. So consult students, say that's possible, I don't think that's going to happen this year, so they get feedback, they feel involved. Identify your case study at an early stage. Why do you want to include it? I know you've got to, as it were, we ask you to, but what's the purpose of it? What will it add? What will it tell the team? What will it tell you beyond what you put in your reflective analysis? What points being made? Is it good practice? Is it a problem that you solved? It could be all sorts of things, but you have to identify for yourself why you're doing it. Identify the overall strengths and areas for development yourselves. Identify gaps, vagueness, what needs improving, who in future might help you to improve these things. Make sure the statements that you put in your reflective analysis have got evidence behind them. Test it yourself. Ask your colleagues. Ask students. Now, do you put some issues and you identify these strengths and weaknesses? Do you try and mend them before the team arrives? Well, be realistic. You've got a limited amount of time. Some things I think can be addressed straight away. Some are quick wins. But be realistic. What's worth starting? What is earmarked for the future? And in the reflective analysis text, it's good to highlight for yourself and for the team issues which need addressing and which will be at the end, I hope, summarised and prioritised. Identify at the end who might do what and what the action plan for addressing these issues might be. And that's the basis then of your action plan for the future. And take advantage of Quality Board contact. It's free consultancy. Well, it's not free. That's why I put it in inverted commas. It's not exactly free, but it's there, so you might as well take advantage. I saw 3 or 4 drafts from each of the institutions. It's a tricky question. You can't give it answers or assessments at that stage, but you can ask questions, which you hope might make the institutions think further. You can be reassuring, you can give encouragement, you can maybe identify gaps and talk about the balance of things and comprehensibility, for example. There are all sorts of things that can be helpful from the Quality Board in the process of the reflective analysis evolving. Now, the review team for both institutions. Myself, Chair, and Frank Quinault, who, it was terrific that Frank had already done one review before. We benefited enormously from his experience with the University of Reykjavik. Thomas Paulo, who is Professor of Animal Ecology at the Swedish University of Agricultural Science. Bruce Mallory, who is ex-provost of the University of New Hampshire. And Anna Maria Gudmundsdottir, student member, who was, in fact, still is, a student of biotechnology, and at that time she was the chair of the Students' Union at the University of Akureyri. I think we both found it's a strong team. You'll notice it wasn't subject specific. I'm a musician. Frank initially was a psychologist, although both of us were involved in learning and teaching and quality assurance matters in our respective institutions. But nonetheless, I think the range of specialisms is quite appropriate. We had experience of both small and large institutions. The student member was terrific. I mean, the 2 student members that have been involved in these review processes have both been exemplary. I mean, Anna Maria had experience in a sense that she was part of the body that organised the student conference in Akureyri last year. I'm very interested in issues of this sort, and was happy to chat and meet with the students and gave good written feedback. She was absolutely excellent. So with Einar and the secretaries from Rannis, we were a very happy bunch, very hard-working bunch. So that was the team. When we got the reflective analysis, what happened to it? Well, of course, everybody read it, and everybody communicated their initial thoughts about it. The relevant issues were circulated amongst the team, collated by the chair and agreed, and potential lines of exploration for the visit were drawn up, circulated, agreed. In addition, I was responsible for asking the institutions for any additional documentation in the lead up to the review, for scheduling along with the rectors or the people responsible what the format of the visit might be, for giving an idea of who we'd like to see and what kind of groups we'd like to see, and for the team With them, we assembled potential questions for groups, and we identified areas of responsibility when it came to writing up the report. The team was briefed, of course, initially by quite a lot of information by letter, and then the day before, Tova joined us for a briefing here. Well, actually, it was in your other premises at Harry, and that team briefing was. Einar talked about Iceland. We talked about the whole quality enhancement framework, and they'd had all the documentation, of course, and the nature and purpose of the reflective analysis, so that they were pretty well up to speed. We talked about the importance of the student issues and the role of the student member being part of the team, and we allocated areas of responsibility for chairing meetings. I think it might be quite interesting if I share with you in this respect the advice that the team was given on the conduct of meetings when it came to the review. Each meeting should have a clear aim. In some cases, the team might wish to interview somebody specific, like I don't know, the HR manager, let's say. But in general, institutions will receive an indication of a kind of category of person, and it's up to them what person that they choose to put in a group. So we might say, a key member of the administrative staff, might be the librarian, might be the IT person, or might be one of the main secretaries. It's up to the institution. Then whether or not the chair is rotated in these meetings, and in both cases we did rotate the chair, all members should be given an opportunity to engage at each meeting. Similarly, the members of the institution should all be given the opportunity to speak. Issues might well be trailed between meetings, particularly significant issues or more controversial issues, so that we can hear the same matter discussed from different points of view. Now, immediately after meetings finishes, the team spends a short time bulleting the points so that we have a clear written recollection of what's happened and the main issues involved, and meetings shouldn't be more than an hour. And that the last one is very important, the overall tenor, while probing questions have to be asked, of course, that's part of what the review is about, to find out things. The overall tenor should be one of engagement and dialogue rather than interrogation, because enhancement is something that should be encouraged. It's one of the cornerstones of the quality enhancement framework approach. Near the time, preparation, let's say, as the review draws close. Again, for some help perhaps for the institutions that are about to be reviewed. But it's also describing what happened in both institutions that I was involved with. Identify and brief the people that are likely to take part at the time of the visit, and ensure that they've got access to, maybe been involved all the way through the preparation of the reflective analysis, but certainly have access to it. Not told what to say, but they should be familiar with the issues that are likely to come up. So, of course, the rector and senior management, key academic or promoted staff, deans, departmental heads, the heads of finance, quality assurance. What I've called ordinary staff, nobody's ordinary, but people who don't have, they're teaching staff, they're not heads of departments, and including part-time staff. Students across all the programmes if possible, undergraduates, postgraduates, alumni, part-time, full-time. There will be at least 2 meetings, if not more, with the students. Key support staff, head of IT, head of human resources, student counsellor, representatives of the university board, university council, representatives of industry members, professional partners, collaborating institutions, and representatives from the case study area. And all personnel that are likely to take part should be alerted to be free for the period of the review. That's very important. And then decide for yourselves as institutions how what's the optimum makeup of each group that are going to meet the review team. Deciding how best to use the free session which will be allocated at the very start of the visit, the first morning, or at least the first couple of hours. Over to you. It's a chance to be positive about your institution, to add information that's maybe not included in the reflective analysis, mention any recent developments, emphasise important issues that are in the reflective analysis, fill in the background, showcase your strengths, give some flavour maybe of the activities that go on in your institution. Maybe take the team on a tour of facilities. If there are other campuses, for example, it might be possible to visit them. Probably don't air your problems. Maybe you want to, but it would be useful if there are factors which have to be taken into consideration that the team should know them. Then advertise the open sessions that will be allocated towards the end of the visit. There'll be a couple of slots allocated, probably in the final afternoon, which staff or students separately can come and talk to the team if there are issues that they want to talk to. I have to say that our experience was that they weren't taken up, but I think it's very important that they're there. It gives an opportunity for things that maybe didn't come up elsewhere in the meetings. Ensure that the practicalities for the visit are in place, comfortable base room and a key so that the review team can leave stuff safely. An additional room if that might be required for parallel sessions. We didn't do too many of those, and you didn't either, Frank, did you?
We were lucky. We had one main room for the main meetings, and there was a small room that we could leave our stuff in and repair to it. That was an ideal combination of the right adjacent one to the other. But that was a bonus, really.
Yeah, I think we had one parallel session in each institution, didn't we? Make sure that there's coffee on hand and that food breaks can be taken quickly. Any equipment requests, like a photocopier, for example, but the chair or Ainer will liaise with you in advance about these things. Make sure there's facilities for computers, and make sure there are legible name cards for all participants. It's very important. Paper ones will do, doesn't have to be brass. And make sure that the timetable is kept to by the people involved so that it doesn't run behind schedule. Then keep in touch with the chair and with the secretariat as the review date approaches for any last minute issues, like requests that the team visit specific facilities. You might want, particularly that they visit this lecture theatre or this laboratory. That you would like them to see a specific group of students, or the other way around, from the review team, that they would like additional documentation, like policy documents or student questionnaires or committee minutes. Stay in touch also about the scheduling of meetings. That can change as people turn out not to be available when they thought they were, or requests to meet specific personnel. Right, next, the main issues that were explored in the reviews. This is a kind of amalgam, but I think they cover most of the issues we explored in the course of the week. And these are likely to be issues that, in one form or another, might well crop up in subsequent reviews. First of all, institutional planning and decision making, responsibilities, the structure and remits of committees. Then, how is the student voice heard? How can students express their views? How are they involved in decision making? What is student responsibility, and how do you gauge student satisfaction? What are student support mechanisms? What's learning support about in your institution? How can you make sure that they access information? And what's communication like? And then there's things like issues of student confidentiality in a small institution. An issue that was really quite a big issue in both the institutions we visit, the question of blended and distance learning. how the institution deals with the different delivery patterns and communication between students and staff and between students and students, how the comparability of experience, not identity of experience, but the comparability of experience is ensured. What mechanisms for student support do you have for both the resident students and the distance learners, and how is assessment correlated? Externality, big issue. Not just what external links do you have, both nationally and internationally, professional, industrial, academic, but how does externality feature in your processes, in assessment, for example? How do you monitor international exchanges? How do you monitor collaborative links with other universities that you might share programs with in Iceland? Validation and review. The introduction and design of courses. How do you monitor courses? How do you know they're working? Do you have an annual report on courses? Where does it go? Who looks at it? How do you benchmark standards? How do you keep an eye that standards don't drift? Assessment. There's a large number of assessment issues, I think, were explored, and I'm sure will go on being explored. The question of single or double marking. The comparability of assessment across departments. Feedback. Transparency. The credibility of learning outcomes. Most institutions have them, but are they used? The relationship between learning outcomes and assessment. The question of whether there ought to be anonymity in students being assessed, if it's possible, but it would definitely be an ideal for objectivity. Then matters of staff induction, staff development, staff training, including for part-time staff and support staff. Is there a teaching policy? Is there a research policy? Are these two related in any way to each other? What's the evidence that there's research being fed into even first-year undergraduate teaching and perhaps more as students become more senior? What are human resource activities? How do they work? Then there's the whole question of student-centred institutional policies, such as complaints policy, plagiarism, appeals, equal opportunities, ethics, disability. Do you have them? But more importantly, do people know about them? Do they have easy access to them? Are they in operation? Then, of course, there's the whole area of quality enhancement and quality assurance related to all of these things and the processes and systematisation of these. And are there action plans? Is there a quality assurance person? Is there a quality assurance handbook? Not necessarily. It's not necessary that there should be, but do people know what happens? Are statistical and management information statistics routinely generated or not? How have you responded to reviews and what actions have you taken and how did they carry on afterwards? And of course also questions of finance. Not that we actually explore these questions, it's not in our remit, but they very definitely influence institutions and therefore can't help influencing what we see, what we hear, and questions of critical mass and size. And I think all of these are probably aspects that are worthy of consideration for all the higher educational institutions in Iceland, and indeed elsewhere. From the point of view of the review team, this was an extremely pleasant experience, if concentrated, if strenuous. Beautiful scenery, excellent weather, two institutions who were courteous, helpful, welcoming, and both took the review very much in the spirit that was intended. And so I want to say from myself and from the team that was involved a very big thank you to both the Agricultural University and to Holar for making us very welcome and for making the visit very rewarding. and of course to Aina for looking after us and driving us around. Staff and students that we met were open and mostly pretty well prepared. Really important that your students are prepared, as they're not told what to say, but that they know what's going on, because that's the most helpful thing for you in the longer run. I think that the institution's own free sessions, the initial institutions worked well. Both institutions seemed to enjoy them, and they were very enjoyable indeed for the team, and that format we should definitely keep. And again, as I said earlier, we should also keep the open invitation to staff and students at the end. I think the general pattern that we had of starting and finishing with senior management, and also updating senior management at the end of the first day, probably worked well. The groups we met and the discussions that took place all seemed to go well. In both institutions, external and industry representatives were particularly helpful and particularly supportive. And you ought to know that. They were incredibly supportive of what you do, and willing to be more helpful if they could, willing to be more involved if they could. And they were very helpful towards us, very willing to talk about it. In Holar we might perhaps wish to talk to more students, but then given the small number of resident students, we understood the difficulties of that, but we enjoyed the students we did speak to. However, I have to say, really, there was too little time. And I hope this didn't make the process seem hurried to either of you, but I can assure that the time allocated to talking to you was amplified by very early mornings and very late nights. And I think for both institutions we had 15 meeting slots allocated in 2 days. And that's not including the initial presentation. I think it was fine in the event, but we got everything done, and I think we covered the issues that we came to see. We think we did. But there was no leeway, and really the reason for that was budgetary, and despite that I don't think we'd do it quite that way again. The other issue is a pretty insoluble one, I think. That's the language issue. The reflective analysis is written in English, and by the way, it's quite important you get a native English speaker to go through it at the end. It makes a big difference. And people are being interviewed in their second language. We're aware of that. And the language that the documentation that the team reads is also in a second language for the team. And it meant that we couldn't really get as much out of the submitted documentation as we would have liked. I mean, Aina helped us to translate the major issues, but normally you would spend a lot of time reading stuff. And it would have been better under the circumstances to spend more time talking to staff and students, quite honestly. We couldn't make the most of that. And again, this is budgetary. And there's also an issue, by the way, of team members for whom English isn't the first language. I don't see how you get round that easily, but it's an issue, and it's one that we're aware of. Of course, the institutions themselves might tell you a slightly different story later on. Right, the outcomes of the reports. Well, judgments had to be made. So on the Saturday, actually on the middle Wednesday as well as on the Saturday, we gathered up all the bullet points and collated them, condensed, discussed, and largely speaking agreed them. And the headline letters, as I said earlier, that went out contained these bullet points as instances of good practice or areas for further development. The subsequent reports, which most of you might have read by now, expand upon these and account for the final judgments. These reports, they're quite tricky things to write, and they are not written by the one hand. They're contributed to by all of the team, including the student member. They're addressed, of course, firstly to the institution, but also to external readers, interested parties, politicians, fee payers, wider public. I mean, their accountability, that's what they're there for. So they have to be evaluative. They have to develop the headline issues. They have to go through strengths and weaknesses and any additional points. And they have to address the main points that you've made in the reflective analysis. But at the same time, we hope they should be easily enough read, and there should be enough external description so that external readers know where they are. They also, of course, contain the review team's judgments. And in these cases, as far as the Agricultural University was concerned, they were allocated confidence in present and future arrangements to secure the academic standards of its award and for the quality of its student learning experience. And in Holar, confidence in academic standards, but in view of the nature of some of the areas for further development, limited confidence in the quality of the student learning experience. Now, it's important to stress here, and I know this has been said before, that limited confidence is not in any sense a statement of failure, but a pointer to the institution on what to strengthen and formalise in terms of its quality processes in order to enhance student learning. The next step here will be for Holar to work with the Quality Board, most probably in the shape of Frank and myself, in developing an action plan, which in fact they've already started, for Enhancement, which along with its own emerging strategic plan will help to secure the best possible experience for current and future students. So I'd like to finish with the very many positive issues that have arisen from these reviews. First of all, the distinctive roles that both institutions play in particularly the rural development and economy of Iceland, and the importance to both of them of long-term sustained development in the fields that they cover. Then the range of high-level specialisms we found among staff and the wide array of relevant research interests. We were impressed too by the range of national and international links and exchanges that they have, which is necessary of course for any small institution, and the willingness from both to collaborate in appropriate areas with other, perhaps larger institutions in Iceland. This, along with very strong, very productive relationships, as I've said already, with industry and with external professionals, and the clear respect and support they have from them. Good records of graduate employment and acceptance for further study, often abroad. The very obvious readiness of clearly dedicated staff, academic support staff, to play an active role in planning, in curriculum development and in raising institutional profiles. And we had a strong impression that this would also apply to student bodies, given their head, given the opportunity. And the commitment in both cases to delivering modes of teaching appropriate to the students' needs, full part-time students, distance and blended learning. And lastly, the openness, very welcome openness of both institutions to any and all suggestions for enhancement. And as I've said there, of these the Icelandic higher education should be proud.
Thank you, Rita.